Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to St Margaret's here in Aberdeen for the latest in our Inspirational Women webinar series. Now, those of you who've been watching these episodes, if you like, will know that we're very grateful for the sponsorship of Aberdeen Standard Capital. And tonight, I'm joined by Miranda Richards and Julie Hutchison from Aberdeen Standard Capital. So welcome, it's super to have you here.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, hi. And I wonder if we could just start tonight by you giving us a little introduction to yourself and to your career. Julie, might I ask you to go first?
Yes, well, I'll describe a bit about what I do just now, and you know, maybe then there can be a bit of rewinding from there. But what I do day by day, I'm a lawyer by background, and my role involves working with charity investors, so charities that have been fortunate and built up finances behind them, and they want to then invest that so it can grow and generate some further finances for the charity. And I work with the charity boards, the trustees, to help them in their decision making about policy and governance. So it's a role that often involves facilitation, is a word that I would use around that. And I find it utterly fascinating because no two are ever the same. But that's part of my day job, but it's one of the 4 spheres I work in. So in addition to the day job, I'm also a visiting professor at Edinburgh Napier in governance and innovation. I volunteer with charities, and also in a public body sphere, I sit on the board of the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. So I have what you would call a jigsaw life.
Yes, absolutely. It sounds fascinating. Thank you, Julie. And Miranda?
Well, I invest money for charities at Aberdeen Standard Capital, but I haven't always done that. So I started as an economist many moons ago, having studied at that wonderful University, St Andrews, and loved my time there. So I did that. Then I became a journalist. I've been a fund manager, a mother of 4 children, and what's called a woman's returner. So I had a varied career path. I then took some time out, about 15 years, in fact, to raise the 4th of my 4 daughters, and then came back into the city relatively recently. But during all that time, I'd sat on a lot of investment committees for charities and been a charity trustee. So obviously moving into the charity sphere was an obvious next step for me.
Thank you. I went to St Andrews too, and I agree it's a lovely place to be a student. There are clearly going to be lots of interesting things for us to talk about because of your very interesting careers in diverse fields. And I'm just going to encourage those people who are watching that if they would like to put a question into either Julie or Miranda or both, then please do enter that through the question function on the webinar. But I'm going to start off with a question. You know that a lot of our girls are going to be watching this as part of their careers days, and they may have preconceived ideas about what a career looks like. Is there anything you would like to say to a young woman, perhaps of 15 or 16, who is considering the route she might take, or what her career path might look like? Julie?
I suppose looking back, in a sense, as I do now in my 40s, I would say that in a sense, I think careers now, with having a longer time span involved in them, I went back to university in my 40s and did a postgrad, which was really interesting and helped me with a transition in my role at that time. So in a sense, I would say don't feel pressured into thinking this is the one moment that you might have for study in your life there, because the nature of working life changes so much and so quickly now. I think we can maybe all anticipate the need to re-engage with education, whether on a continuing basis or indeed, postgrad further down the line. So maybe that takes the pressure off slightly.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Miranda?
Well, for me, it's dead easy. Don't expect to have a linear career path. And in fact, actually, a linear career path is pretty unlikely, I think, these days, because a lot of the 14, 15, 16-year-old girls that may be watching will end up in jobs that we don't even know exist yet. And so I think to try and say, well, I'm going to go and learn French at university, and therefore I'm going to do something with French. Forget that. And I think the other thing is that not to stress about it, do something you really enjoy. Because if you study something you really enjoy, you'll do well at it. And, you know, like me, I studied economics and international relations, and now I'm advising charities. It's not a great link there. So don't necessarily think that you have to study something in order to get to a certain position.
Thank you, Miranda. And I was interested in what you said there, Julie, about, you know, the jigsaw that is your working life. How did that come about for you? You know, because I get the impression that you enjoy that and it's enriching for you to have different roles. How did that come about?
It very much evolved gradually. I think I became involved as a charity trustee, gosh, 8 years ago now. And gradually from there, I started to, that was the first time really I started looking outside the sector that I've been focused in financial services for so much of my working life, you know, the last 17 years. And in a sense, it's a bit like when you open a door and you have a look at what's on the other side, and it's interesting. You just keep going and you decide to have a look and see what else is there. And one thing led to another. And I think the academic side really just came as a result of I'd always done a bit of tutoring at Edinburgh University, which is where I graduated in law. And I'd done that for a few years and then had to stop that when a bit of international travel with my job emerged sort of around 2010. But it was just so nice to be able to re-engage with that as a student myself, and then translate that into moving into some teaching as well. So it's been a gradually evolutionary process, and it's been great, the support I've had from Aberdeen Standard as my main employer, really, because I've gone down to 4 days a week and have done that not as a consequence of being a carer or a mother, but really just as a desire to allow that blend of different roles. So yes, as Miranda says, it's not about the linear path, it's about finding the mix that works for you.
And I'm getting the impression from both of you then that it's about finding at different points in your life and different points in this sort of career journey and life journey, a balance that's right for you. So Miranda, you know, you have 4 girls, and you know, you've told us that, you know, you took a change of course to spend some time focused on them, but you were doing quite a lot of other things at the same time. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I had to sort of take a career break, in part because a friend of mine wrote a book called I Don't Know How She Does It. And the protagonist in that is a girl called Kate Reddy, who is juggling her work and her life. Now, this book came out a long time ago now, but Kate Reddy bears certain similarities to me, I would say. She works in a similar sort of outfit, doing a similar sort of job, etc., etc. And there was a rather large dedication to me at the front of the book. And I'd been asked if I would basically work on the film, because they'd also sold the film rights. So there was sort of quite a lot of things came together. And I was also pregnant with number 4. So that's really what prompted me to leave the industry. But what I found was when I'd left the industry was actually there were all these other things that I wanted to do, and actually each thing that I did then informed something else. So I started as being a member of the PTA, and you know, became chair of the PTA, fairly standard. And then somebody I met said, please, would you become a governor at a girls' school near Norwich, which is where I was based. And that was my first foray really into sort of governorship and trusteeship. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I loved that sort of interaction with other people, and the sort of, I guess, you're helping create lives and mold lives. And I really enjoyed that aspect of being on a charity board. And then from there, various other trusteeships came along. And with each one, I learnt more and developed my skills. And I think if I were my 15, 16-year-old self again, I would say do things outside your main career or job, because they will help inform your main career and job. And keep up that extracurricular stuff. It's so easy to let it drop, but just keep it up, because it will be a source of experience and enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, that's something you've done too, isn't it? You've always been involved in other things alongside your main work.
I think as Miranda says, I call it, a twin track, that no matter what it is you're doing, having another plate spinning at the same time, they end up informing each other in ways that you might never have imagined at the outset. And actually, the people that you get to know, tremendously supportive relationships can be formed and I think as you go through life, it's interesting to think that for some of the young women watching, that there can be some fantastic friendships ahead with women you've not even met yet. And that for me is something that I had no idea about as a 15, 16-year-old, that I think you have this idea that your life is quite fixed and formed at that point, and you're now just about to take what you have somewhere else, whether it's to university or work or whatever. But the great unknown is really quite exciting. And for me, I had quite a strong interest in language at school, so I had a wonderful trio of teachers who taught me history, English and German, which really kindled my interest in language, and ultimately studying law was very much linked to that. And I think if there are ways to maintain an interest in an ability to speak another language, it's such a key to traveling and really understanding other people in other cultures. And I think that's really important in today's world.
Absolutely, thank you. Now, I can't resist going back to this book and this film. So Miranda, I've read the book and have been really enjoying it. Thank you for that. And am I right in thinking that whilst you are a large inspiration for the book, the whole story isn't just about you? There are other inspirations too. Kate is not entirely you, is she?
No, she absolutely isn't. She is an amalgam of lots of other sort of working mothers who at the same time were trying to juggle that, going into work and also having this pull of having a child at home. And remember many years ago, so we didn't have the sort of maternity laws we have now. So actually that tension was really strong, and certainly in the world I was in at the time, there is no way that I would have had a photograph of my children on my desk. The men could all do that, but I couldn't. So yes, it is an amalgam of lots of people in the book. And one thing I can tell you for sure is right at the beginning of the book, Kate arrives home from a trip, I think, to New York. And it's very, she has to take something for the bake sale the next day. And so she distresses mince pies. And I would not have been distressing mince pies. I would have been starting from scratch, making the pastry and probably making the mincemeat at 1 o'clock in the morning, because that was me. Yeah, so you were really trying to achieve some sort of perfection on all fronts there. Yeah, absolutely. That's probably pretty true. Yeah. The book's, it's witty and it's funny and it's light, but there is this undertone of how difficult it was and perhaps still is, and that's what I think we're interested in exploring, to be a woman working in the city. How have things moved on? To what extent have they moved on, and what do we need to do to improve things further? Well, can I go on that one first, Julie, before you go? So I left, as I say, when I was pregnant with my fourth child, who has now just left school. So that's pretty frightening, isn't it? But I left. There was just no way that I thought I would ever get back into the city. And I spent years saying to my daughters, if you want to follow a career, don't go into the city, because you cannot have children and then get back in. How wrong I was, because the city started, a number of firms started this thing called the Women's Returner Program, and they're designed for people who have had time out to raise a family, or to do a PhD, or to look after an elderly relative, whatever reason you've had time out. And many firms now do these programs, and they are specifically designed for people at a certain level, because what they're trying to do is get that gender equality within the organization, and they realize they need people who've reached a certain level to make sure they have that gender equality at the sort of management level, if you like. And so I got on one of those, and I got back into the city after a long gap. And of course, I felt incredibly grateful for this firm for taking us back, because I just, I've been out of it for so long. Of course, what I forgot or didn't realize, and it's a message really for the girls and for anybody watching who's in a similar position, is that I had huge skills to bring to the organization. I had all that stuff that I'd absorbed in the years that I'd been out, whether that be, negotiation skills, how to negotiate with a 2-year-old, that sort of thing. Actually, it's really useful stuff. And if you've been in one organization or in one environment your whole time, you maybe don't have those skills to bring in. So actually, it works both ways. So the short answer to your question is it's moved on hugely. There are probably things that we can do that are needed, but I think there is the will and the determination to try and see better diversity in all its forms in financial services.
Thank you, Miranda. And Julie, on your Twitter account, we've seen your commitment to diversity. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about that? How close do you think we are to really achieving a proper understanding, a sort of living reality of that in the workplace?
Well, if I sort of think back to life in a law firm 20 odd years ago, when I was last there almost, it was unusual for women to take more than 3, maybe 6 months off if they'd become a mother. And certainly I can't think of anyone I knew who took paternity leave, as it was then been called. That has greatly changed in the last 2 decades, and actually in particular just in the last couple of years. And the parental leave, colleagues within our place at Aberdeen Standard, it's not unusual for men to take a number of months and then share that responsibility with women. For me, that's the main change, because things won't change while childcare is still seen as predominantly women's work. I was fascinated the other day to encounter 2 people who are in a job share in another company, and they have a combined email address. I did a bit of a double take at it, because I realised it was an amalgam of their names, and I thought, who is this person? Then realised it was a combination of the 2. So even things like that, finding a man and a woman doing a job share, covering a week and doing a certain number of days each. Myself doing 4 days. That's not something I think would have been so common a number of years back. So I think things are accelerating. And the situation we've all been in the last year, I think, encourages that flexibility, because we've all seen that things are not as fixed as they once might have been in work environments.
So do you think there could be some unintended positive consequences from the COVID pandemic? That's an expression that a school inspector introduced me to last week. So I'm on the lookout for them everywhere, particularly in school. But in your environments, in your workplaces, do you think there are things that are going to be better as a result of the experience we've all had?
Miranda, do you want to?
I think the acceptance of working from home is the primary thing for me. And again, years and years ago, it just wasn't possible to work from home. And actually, when I came back into the city, one of the things I said was, I need to work from home 2 days a week. And it was okay, but it wasn't, I was pretty unusual doing that. And that was 3 years ago. Now, I think if anybody said, I want to be in the office 4 days a week, people would go, really? Ooh, what's going on? So I do think that has definitely changed. And the ability to do things like this vastly changes the way that we can communicate with clients. The way that board meetings operate, again, hugely different as a result of the pandemic. I am a trustee of a educational foundation down in London. And during the pandemic, obviously, we had to have more meetings.
Yeah.
They were all possible because of Zoom and Teams and everything else. So I think that is the biggest, probably positive improvement, I think.
Yeah, I was at a board meeting today for a non-educational charity, and I've joined that board during the pandemic. I haven't yet met most of the board members in person. I haven't been to a real life meeting. We wouldn't have considered that was possible pre the pandemic, would we?
Sorry, one other thing. I do think there are some sort of ways of working in meetings that we need to develop. I think of Jackie Weaver and the parish council, and we don't want that to be sort of the way that we all the way that these meetings are held. But I think that will evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, you were going to say something, I think.
In agreeing with Miranda, I think there's so much of the online way of doing things that we simply won't unwind from, because especially when you're dealing with groups of people, it's one thing to easily arrange diaries one-to-one. You want to catch up with someone, have a coffee. We all look forward to the future of doing that. But when you're trying to coordinate a group of people to get together, and very often quite geographically dispersed, groups of trustees, actually the ability to go, right, a week on Thursday is how's everyone placed, when you're not having to factor travel in, and it's a fairly defined set of decisions that need to be made. Actually, this way of working can really contribute to helping organisations operate smoothly and save the face-to-face social bit once that becomes possible for the real value add stuff, the real celebration of things, and allow that blended approach to emerge.
It can also be more economical and without travel. It can also be more environmentally friendly, can't it? And that brings me on to the theme of ethical investment. So it's wonderful working with young people who are so committed to making the world a better place than the one we're currently living in, and I see it on a daily basis, that commitment to the environment. Obviously we're here in Aberdeen, so there are interesting discussions about the industries that exist around us. Any thoughts on that development in terms of finance and investment and ethical investment?
Miranda, do you want to share some experience on that from a governor perspective?
So I was a complete skeptic about ethical, sustainable investing, as I like to call it, when I was on one of my trustee charities. I just didn't think that it could possibly be the right thing to do. And then I came back into the city and I realized in just how powerful this could be, both for the charities themselves and also for the institution itself, if you like, and also for their investment. So the two different things to look at here. And more of the organizations that we look after are, for them, sustainability or responsible investing, as we like to call it. It's such an alphabet soup, but we call it responsible investing. Is completely key and integral to everything they do, because not least because it serves their purposes in terms of what they're trying to do. Also, we find that companies that are investing in or behaving in a responsible way tend to actually produce better results over the long term. So I think it's something that's not going to disappear. There's definitely a very strong push from younger trustees and younger stakeholders to look at the way that investments are made and to make sure that they are being invested in this responsible way.
Okay, thank you. And another question that's perhaps going to go to Miranda, but perhaps both of you'd like to jump in on this. What financial advice would you give to a school leaver today?
Well, I'll do the disclaimer, shall I, Miranda? The lawyer in me says, well, of course we can't give financial advice.
Can't we give? And we know that investments go down as well as up. Yeah, we'll put all those caveats around it. General advice.
Well, my thoughts would be, a role I was in a number of years ago, prior to the one I have now, looked at consumer finance and tips for people, helping them with, simple things they could do to sort of support their financial security. And I know it sounds terribly boring, maybe as a young person thinking about pensions, but my goodness, am I, grateful for some wise advice I got 20 years ago. And in a way, the way the rules work now means that pensions in the workplace are a much more normal thing, and people are obliged to have them. But believe me, you will be grateful for the financial security behind you, because anything that you can save in your 20s is worth exponentially more in later life because of the compounding effect. So start saving as early as you can.
I mean, it's an area that, I think we probably would think there isn't enough financial education in schools. And it's certainly something that, we work into, the final year of school. But if only there was space for more of it earlier on. Miranda?
I would just say, don't be frightened of finance. Throughout my career, I've found so many women who are slightly older who just don't want to discuss their finances. They claim they don't understand it. Actually, it's not difficult to understand. It just needs somebody to explain it in the right way. And I think, historically, it's been the preserve of the men. And so my theory, this is only my theory and not to be repeated by anybody else, but my theory is that a lot of the whole language around finance was constructed by men to make it seem like a bit of a club. And we are absolutely determined to get rid of that club. Women need to be in that club too, but it needs to be a slightly different club. And absolutely, don't be scared of asking questions. Don't be scared of looking things up on Google if you don't understand it. Google won't always get it right, but it's really important for women, and young women particularly, to take hold of their own financial destiny and not rely on other people to do it for them.
It's a good point, actually, and from a kind of financial independence point of view, there are a lot of blogs and things out there that focus on young finance, young people's money issues. So I'd encourage people to keep an eye out for them, because that will frame it in a way that's more relevant for you where you're at now.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. So that we can perhaps share them. Thank you. Now, talking of charities, this school is a charity. You obviously work with charities all the time. The pandemic has been difficult for a lot of charities, in different ways, hasn't it? Is this something that you're encountering in your work? I mean, are there any general themes that you would be sharing around how charities in particular can overcome the challenges that have been presented by the pandemic?
I mean, it's just been such a hugely varied experience for charities as it has been for us as individuals. You've had an extreme situation where some are under threat of closure because all their income sources have dried up, and you've had other charities, maybe grant-making organisations, where actually operationally the impact hasn't been necessarily so great. Maybe the organisations they're funding have needed them more than ever, and maybe they saw their investments dip in value and bounce back again. But actually the diversity of how this has affected charities means it's not, there's not been one thing that's happened. It's hugely varied depending on the type of organisation you are.
I mean, and sort of appropriate governance of charities is clearly very important. And we've seen big charities hit the headlines with stories of impropriety, which I think has led some people to question the value of donating to large charities. Have you seen any impact of that?
I think anecdotally from lawyers that I've discussed this with, if anything, this has actually prompted greater donor behaviour, because those who have the means have been ever more conscious that this is a moment more than ever that their financial support is needed. And I know there are surveys done, in Scotland. I think Oscar did one in the last 18 months or so, looking at the public confidence in charities, which does remain pretty reasonable in Scotland, actually. And so I think people, especially thinking about things like food banks and the types of organisation that have been relied on so heavily, I do think this has been a period where perhaps some people have reassessed how they viewed the sector. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think one of the impacts of the pandemic probably has been on trustees and recruitment of trustees. I think finding trustees has been more difficult, and of course the trustees that tend to be of a certain demographic. So I think that has had an impact on some, and I do know that there are some charities who are really struggling to recruit trustees. So, for anybody on the call who is thinking of becoming a trustee, there are lots of networks out there, and there are lots of charities out there that are looking for trustees, and it's a great way of having an extra string to your bow. However old you are, there are always extra strings to have to your bow.
Okay, thank you. We've got a lovely question just come in from one of our 6th years who's getting ready to go to university. And this is a question for you, Julie. So as a visiting professor, what are the attributes that most impress you in a student?
Oh my goodness, what a question. I think there's a blend of things that actually it's not necessarily even about a student. If I think about this almost with an employment hat on and the job interview scenario, there's a combination of both what is said and how it's said, and someone's conversational ease, which is terribly hard when you're incredibly nervous about the situation you might be in. But if I think about the people that stick most in my memory after meeting them for the first time, it's both what they've said, but perhaps some of the anecdotes and the ease with which they may have communicated.
That's interesting, thank you. Miranda, would you have any observations on that, perhaps, in terms of recruitment of younger people into your company?
I think it's those soft skills, as Julie said. It's the sort of emotional intelligence, and some of the things that they've done aside from just the main work ethic. They've got to have that work ethic, but enthusiasm goes a hugely long way, I think, in life generally.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's really interesting hearing you pick up on the sort of wider experiences of all of us, not just our young people, because I've been talking to quite a lot of our 5th years today, and one of the things that they're most looking forward to about school, hopefully returning to more normality next session, is the sort of involvement in the wider extracurricular programme, because some of that just it's not been allowed, it's been deemed to be unsafe this year, and that's something that we really encourage, and it's just fantastic to hear the girls say how much they value it, and how much they're looking forward to getting back to it. And of course, not everybody in our school or in any school is planning to go to university, or not go to university straight from school. So if people were aspiring to enter the sort of world of finance without going to university, can you tell us a little bit about the routes that might be possible for somebody thinking about that?
Absolutely, and it's one that we've paid quite a bit of attention to over the years through our early careers programme. Absolutely the case that there are paid summer internships with the emphasis on paid. That's a proper role with a living wage. And in addition to that, there's a school leavers programme as well. So the routes into financial services companies and indeed accountancy firms and other large employers. Yes, there may be a graduate route, but most definitely there'll be a range of other options and types of role. And if you think about the amount of training any firm is going to offer, because every area has its own specialism now, really. And so, yes, you're recruited in a sense for attitude and interest in many ways, and a lot of the training will be given on the job.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, that, what we're always trying to encourage, the girls at St Margaret's to think is that, you can be your own person, just because your big sister or other people follow a particular route, it doesn't mean that, you have to do that too. And I would be really encouraging of people looking at, different post-school routes. And that's sort of something that's been shining through from both of you this afternoon, that, you're clearly women who have done your own thing, and, you've done what's right for you. Am I right in saying that? Is that a message we'd like to convey to anybody watching, Julie?
Absolutely. It's finding your own path, which is not something that needs predetermined on day one. It will unfold as you go through things.
Yes, absolutely. Miranda?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say always look forward. Don't look back on what you didn't do. You'll regret what you didn't do. So say yes more, I think, is saying yes. And the other thing I would say is, a non-linear path is fine. Make sure you do what you want to do, but also make sure you learn from your failures.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by learning from your failures, you will then be more likely to achieve, the best you that you can achieve.
Thank you. Not everybody's path is going to involve close encounters with Pierce Brosnan, though, is it, Miranda?
No, indeed. So that was, yes, I guess probably one of the highlights of my life so far. I was, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I was an advisor to the film, which was delayed in being made. But when it was eventually made, I was flown out to New York to go on set. And I knew nothing about this world. Who does? I mean, I was a housewife in Norfolk. I certainly wasn't used to the Hollywood greats. Anyway, I ended up on the film set, and Sarah Jessica Parker played the role of Kate Reddy. So I met her, and she was lovely, and said how honoured she was to meet me. And I thought, well, that should be the other way around, but never mind. And then also met Pierce Brosnan, who was absolutely just charming. Absolutely charming. Yes.
Well, we have seen some very glamorous shots of you on the red carpet, so we will be sharing those, because we like a bit of glamour as well as everything else. So
well, I've never felt so glamorous. The film company flew in a hairdresser from London to do our hair in New York. I mean, and it was all done sitting in a hairdressing salon opposite Tiffany's on Fifth Avenue. So the whole thing was utterly glamorous.
Yes, it sounds magical, and you never know what's in front of you. I can't imagine that happening to me just now, but who knows? Who knows what's to come? Who knows? Well, it's just been really great to talk to you both this afternoon, and you've shared so many interesting insights into your own work, but I think some great advice to everybody watching, and to our young people in particular. So thank you so much for giving us your time, and thanks again to Aberdeen Standard Capital for supporting us in this venture. The last in the series is a week today, and we hope that people will join us again at that. But to Miranda and Julie, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.